So you know how in DC Comics, the Green Lanterns, Red Lanterns, different Lantern Corps out there create hard light constructs, right? John Stewart will create guns, and Kyle Rayner will create mechs, and Hal Jordan will create like a giant wrench, and Guy Gardner will just beat you to death with his bare hands. Dude, like, in the absolute universe, these guys are way more powerful, right? I mean, like, look at this. This is a maze constructed out of hard light construct. That's how powerful the Red Lanterns are in the DC Absolute Universe. Okay, so we're not gonna spoil this because this is part of an amazing fight, but this is why I love Absolute Green Lantern and DC Comics right now, because again, it's basically Star Wars in DC Comics, right? Instead of the Empire, you have the Dark Stars, and instead of the Rebel Alliance, you have the Lanterns. And what's funny here, and this is something that I didn't think about until recently, what's funny about all this is in Star Wars, the Rebel Alliance is composed of millions and billions of people from across the galaxy who are all actively working to try to cast off the Empire. But that's not the case in DC's Absolute Universe, right? What you see here, this is it. Right, Hal Jordan, who's basically channeling the power of love. John Stewart, who has the power of total enlightenment, which basically makes him invulnerable, but there's a huge caveat to it that we didn't know about until this issue that we're talking about here. Guy Gardner has the power of restraint, so basically thinking before you act, which honestly, he doesn't fully understand his powers. And Sojourner Mulane, the Green Lantern, these are basically it. This is really all it is. And so what ends up going on here is that Sojourner Mulane calls out to Tomar-Re. Now, if we use the comparison of the Rebel Alliance here, then in effect, Sojourner and Hal Jordan, John Stewart, and Guy Gardner have just been brought in to the Rebel Alliance and just gained their powers. They have no clue what all's going on out there, or at least they're learning about it. But Tomar-Re has been doing this for a very, very long time. As you guys can tell, the Rebel Alliance is not very organized and it's not very structured in any meaningful way, right? And for the most part, it's been whittled down to virtually nothing. But what's cool about this is that Tomar-Re has been taking pot shots at the Dark Stars everywhere he can and trying to destroy them as best he can. He's been a one-man band for years and years and years. And so in this moment when Sojourner Mulane calls him out and says, "You have put me on this ship. You are taking me away from Earth. We have to go back because my ex-wife Cam is about to be killed by Hector Hammond." Hector Hammond is basically just this super rich, corrupt business tycoon on Earth who's also a dickhead and would probably kill Sojourner's wife Cam the instant he gets the chance. But the reality here is that because Tomar has been fighting against the Dark Stars for so long, he knows exactly what's at stake here. And that's why he tells her, number one, going back is not an option. And number two, when she says, well, something might happen to Cam, the response of Tomar, what kind of something? And he doesn't ask this as like concern, like, oh my God, what might happen to Cam? Like, fill me in, because maybe we do have to go back. No. That's not how he's asking this question. He's asking it sarcastically. What kind of something? Sojourner Mulane, a new planet in the heavens howling about crime and judgment, the crust of your world bursting under her feet, a shockwave that turns everyone she ever met into atomic dust, because that's what happened to my world. Right? Because as part of the Dark Star's force, you have Mogo. Because Mogo is basically an answer to the question, what if the Death Star from Star Wars was sentient and could think? And that's why he tells her, that's what appeared in my sky. Mogo, from the Dark Stars, showed up on my world and obliterated it. And so he says, right, you are worried over Cam. Right, you're worried about losing your ex-wife at the hands of some crazed business tycoon who's just a villain. But imagine that Mogo shows up to your planet, and imagine losing everyone and everything that ever mattered to you in an instant, just like that. And so that's when he goes into his origin. And that's one of the cool things that we get, this kind of explanation about what the Dark Stars have been doing across the Absolute Universe. And so he tells this story referencing himself in the third person. So when he says, you don't understand why the Green Lantern came to your community, he's talking about himself, right? And so he says, you don't understand what the Owens want from you. They took your mother and she came back glowing, a warm, soft red like a night light. She's so beautiful now. You are not beautiful. The Owens didn't take you. Something must be broken inside of you. Your mother loves you anyway. And how do you repay her? In the last moments of your world, you steal the flame from her, and then you watch her die. You watch them all die. Has that ever happened to you, Joe? Have you ever suffered? Now, on the surface, it just looks like the origin of Tomar-Re, but it gives us so much more, right? And so if we say that the Lanterns are the Rebel Alliance, and we take that a step further and we say the Lanterns are effectively Jedi, then instead of these individuals being taken to Coruscant to meet with the Jedi Council of Yoda and Mace Windu, who 100% survived being thrown out the window by Palpatine, I'm 100% in that camp. Instead of that happening, all that happens is that Owens, who we still don't fully understand within the comic, basically send out these Green Lantern ships, and the Green Lantern ships show up to a world and start snatching people up. And then they start putting them through these mental trials, like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter, right? Which group do they belong to most, right? Those individuals who are seeking total enlightenment, they get the gold flame. Those individuals who show personal restraint in the face of panic and chaos, they get the red flame. Sometimes they get the green, but we don't know if any of the other traditional Lantern Corps colors from the main DC universe exist here. Blue or indigo or orange or anything like that. And so that's what the Dark Stars have been doing. They've been traveling around from world to world that have individuals who have been chosen by the Owens to become Lanterns and obliterating all those worlds, wiping the whole thing out. Right? So it's like in Star Wars, if the Empire started traveling from world to world that had Jedi on it and wiping out the entirety of the world, because honestly, it's just easier that way. But for Tomar-Re, what's really interesting here is this feels less like he took his powers from his mother and sounds more like she gave those powers to him. Kind of like Superman. He was sent away from a dying world while he watched his world die, right? So it's actually a really cool interpretation. It can kind of go either way, but he continues on with this, right? The Green Lantern shattered, right? The Green Lantern ship that came to his world was shattered. Over 3,000 souls in his town were destroyed, to say nothing of all the other people who were on his world. And he says, there were other red flames aside from my mother. There were green flames too, right? Individuals who had been chosen by the Owens to wield their power against the force of the Dark Stars. They were all destroyed. He says a black star hunted them all through the rubble of the world. They used their flames as Oa had taught them, and they were all destroyed anyway. And then the black star came to kill me, and I had not been taught, so I killed back. He was the first person that I killed, but not the last. And as I grew, as my skills grew, I earned a new name, Tomar, the anomaly feared by Owens and Black Stars alike. I killed every Black Star I saw and stepped over Owen corpses to do it. Hadn't they stepped over ours? But I always knew that one day there would be another, a Tomar of the green power to work with. Now keep in mind, Tomars are individuals who gain their powers without being chosen. Right? So imagine that instead of a person being born with the Force and then being trained on how to use it by the Jedi Council, imagine someone could just bestow you with the powers of the Force. Or imagine that you could just like take the powers of the Force from someone else and give them to yourself. Now, it doesn't always mean it's nefarious, right? Again, in the case of Tomar, his mother gave him his powers. He wasn't chosen by the Lantern, they were just passed on to him. But in the case of Sojourner Melaine, she accidentally took the powers from Abin Sur, the Green Lantern that had come to Earth, and had basically started the selection process on deciding who was going to get powers and who was not, right? That's why Tomar means anomaly in the Absolute Green Lantern line. And so that's why when he says a Tomar of the green power to work with, it's a Green Lantern who basically has powers that were not given to them, but that they took. But then he also says, an intact Green Lantern to be my weapon. We are not going back, Joe. We're going to hunt Mogo, kill him, and save the universe. Do you understand? Now, the entire time this is going on, Tomar-Re is subduing Sojourner Melaine. She has these insane headaches. We don't know exactly why it's happening, but it's actually Tomar-Re who's doing it, and he's doing it on purpose, right? It's actually part of the nature of his powers, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But at that point, John Stewart steps in and says, and what if I say no? And the response to Tomar-Re, John Stewart, student of the Gold Flame, a man of knowledge. You know that Mogo will come to Earth. And when he gets there, he will destroy it. So why wouldn't you want to stop him? Right? And that's where John just says, you called the Green Lantern a weapon. When you abducted Joe and Hal, you called it a gun. So if we're riding inside this giant gun, what's the ammunition? Where are the bullets, Tomar-Re? And Tomar just says, look around, John. Where do you think? And it turns out that what he plans to do is use the bodies of all the people who were inside this lantern. Because lest we forget here, right? When the Green Lantern showed up on Earth, it showed up to the town of Evergreen. That's where John Stewart, Hal Jordan, Guy Gardner, and Sojourner Mulane were at. All these individuals that you see here are individuals who were taken by the Lantern, and there's still seemingly a kind of selection process going on. It's still deciding whether or not they are going to get powers. But we also learned that only a handful of these individuals are going to get powers, right? So you have Sojourner, John, Hal, and Guy. There'll be 6 more who will be chosen. So we're kind of waiting to see who those individuals are going to be. One of them is probably going to be Kyle Rayner, to be honest, because I believe Kyle Rayner was in the town at the time that everybody was taken. But in effect, Tomar-Re is going to use humans as bullets, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I guess if you fire anything at a fast enough speed, it will become a projectile, right? Hence the reason why a piece of straw can penetrate a telephone pole whenever you have a tornado. It's basically similar to that. And that's why John Stewart says, I had an inkling that that's what you planned on doing. You know that I cannot let you sacrifice these people. And Tomar just says, do you think you can stop me? Even with the gold power, is that what you want to do right now? And he says, we've reached our destination, John Stewart. Take a look outside. Because that's when you realize Tomar-Re has brought them directly in the path of Dark Stars, right? The Empire, essentially. And now a giant fight is happening out there. And so in the here and now, their main focus needs to be dealing with the Dark Stars. Then they'll worry about everything else afterwards. And that's when you learn what Lanterns are really capable of and why it is that Sojourner Mulane is getting these headaches. Because at that point, she's just basically subdued. And she's like, I have to be out there with the others. And Tomar tells her that's not part of the plan. The red power is restraint, Joe. And it's not just restraint for yourself. Do you feel that? In your mind, shaped like a headache. That's me restraining you, building barriers between synapses, shutting down choices. I'm literally paralyzing your brain's ability to think. Like, that's what restraint means, right? When it comes to the idea of restraint, it's not simply just controlling yourself, it's controlling other people, basically dominating the wills of others. That's what it looks like. And so Sojourner says, you said that you needed a Tomar of the green power to work with, but you meant work through. So I'm just steering the ship. Is really all it is. You needed me to get you to your destination because you could not control the ship on your own. You could convince John to make a short trip, but for this, outer space, you need someone like me, someone who's not trained, who basically doesn't have mental blocks in place preventing me from using my powers in certain ways. Because again, that's very Jedi-esque, right? The Jedi have a code. Always use your powers for defense, never use them for offense. The Sith, on the other hand, are just like, passion reigns supreme. Do what it is that makes you happy with your powers. And so because of the fact that Sojourner Mulane wasn't really taught any kind of code, she doesn't have any mental blocks. There's no real belief system on how she's supposed to use her powers. So she can use them however she wants to. But Tomar is the exact same way. He's not supposed to be using his powers this way, but he's using them this way anyway. And so that's why he says, even so, I would relax into this. Sojourner, Black Star stasis beams pause momentum. They do not negate it. Once your friends take the Black Stars out, we will be moving again at speed to Mogo as fast as we can. So basically their trip's been interrupted. And he says that'll go easier if you simply just accept control and allow me to dominate your will. But in turn, Sojourner says you're forgetting something. The green power is higher up on the hierarchy than red power. I am stronger than you are. And Tomar just says, no, right? You're confusing me with an Owen. That's how they see it. They follow rules. They believe that there is a hierarchy, but the hierarchy only exists if you believe in it. And if you do not believe in a hierarchy, then there's no limitations because you're not limiting yourself. And because I'm not limiting myself, I can do basically whatever I want to do. But you and I, we were not taught any rules at all. That's what makes us anomalies. So let's use logic instead. I am older than you. I have survived more than you. I've had more practice with my powers than you have with yours. What makes you think you can even lay a glove on me, Jo Mullein of Earth? And so that's where she says, have you ever suffered, Tomar? For all your crybaby backstory, I don't know if you really have suffered. Not really, and not properly. Not yet. And in turn, she creates this giant fist and just clocks him. And at that point, we're off to the races. And the fight between the two of them is incredible, right? It's amazing. But that's when we jump back to Jon Stewart, right? And there's a really cool thing that we learn here. As the Gold Lantern, Jon Stewart is immune to the powers of the Dark Stars. They can't harm him, right? Nothing they do works on him. But there's a caveat, right? Because in that moment, he's told by one of the Dark Stars, yes, gold is our weakness, but not in the way you think. The weakness is actually yours. And they say, you're an initiate in gold, the apprentice, right? The student of Oa, and you're right. I cannot touch you, but have you learned anything that can touch me? In all your search of knowledge, do you know what can defeat me? What does the gold power do exactly? It's a defensive power. It protects you from us, from the actions of other people. And by doing so, it protects you from having to act. And that's the caveat here. The gold power only makes Jon Stewart immune and invulnerable when he's not using it. That's the caveat, man. Dude, what a caveat there is, right? He's immune from everybody, but he can't do anything. He can't use his powers offensively on anybody. And so that's why he says there's no way that's true. He's kind of flabbergasted by it. So the only way that I am invulnerable is if I do nothing at all, that it's a passive ability. All the powers in creation, invulnerability, you're effectively unstoppable, and there's nothing you can do with it. So with all this power, the best he can do is watch on as his friends are involved in this fight. But one of the cool things that happens with Guy Gardner, because while Guy Gardner's fighting Hal Jordan, right, with the flame of love is just kind of sitting out there, but he doesn't know what it does. He doesn't know how to use his power. So it really all kind of comes down to Guy Gardner to face off against these Dark Stars. There's only a couple of them, right, only a few of them. So it's not like he's overwhelmed by hundreds of enemies. And so when he says, it would be great if you would do something, Hal Jordan, Hal Jordan's like, I don't know, right? I don't know how to make this power work. It's barely keeping me alive out here, right? And so that's where Guy says, so I should just stop holding back. And in this just crazy moment, right, that everybody on the internet's been talking about, he transforms his physical body, right, turns his stomach into a gun and fires off stomach acid, which is kind of bonkers. And honestly, Absolute Batman just did that, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. And so that's where he says, the discipline of the red flame, total control over my own body, including bodily processes. Our stomachs produce hydrochloric acid to digest food. That's a weapon. I can turn myself into a living weapon. So again, he's learning more about his powers. Now, is it gross? Yes. Is it the most anime thing that I've ever seen in a comic book? 100%. But is it dope? Hell yeah, man, it's absolutely amazing. And so Hal Jordan is like, does that mean Tomar-Re can do that? And Guy Gardner's just like, I have no idea how. You would have to ask him. And so at that point, we jump back to the fight between Tomar and Mullein. And that's why this is so cool, because she says, two choices, Tomar-Re. You get out of my head, or I smash my way into yours. And when she goes on the attack, Tomar just says, box, and encases her in a box instantly. And he says, irresistible force meets immovable object. Stalemate, but not really. The green power and the red power aren't that different. They both operate on levels of knowledge. You know just enough to create constructs and to shoot energy blasts. Don't feel bad. You've only had a few weeks with your powers. I've had years with the red flame. I know everything there is to know. If I put a box around you, I could kill you right now. but that doesn't help anybody. But what's more interesting than a box? A maze. And that's when he creates this entire maze out of a hard light construct. And he spends the whole time taunting her because seemingly he is the maze, right? Because she says, cute, right? Where did you go, Tomar-Re? And he says, oh, I'm somewhere behind a wall, around a corner. Why not try to find me, right? And she asks, is that the game, right? Hide and seek, or is this even real? Is it all in my head? And he says, we are inside the Green Lantern, Joe. There's really no difference between what's real and what's in your head. But if I want to get into your head, red flame constructs can be physical, or they can be mental blocks and mental restraints. Eventually, I'm gonna build a clamp around your willpower that you can't break, and then we can get to work. We can take care of the Black Stars outside. We continue the journey to Mogo, and we kill the Black Star world. The controller's power base crumbles entirely. Everyone lives happily ever after. Even you. Why would you want to stand in the way of that? Why are you resisting? And she says, because you're gonna use the population of my hometown as literal bullets. You said just as much to John. Everyone the Green Lantern's holding in stasis here. Everyone who has not been assigned a power yet, assuming they ever will be. The whole town of Evergreen. You are going to fire them at Mogo like bullets, and they don't get to live happily ever after that. And Tomar says no, they won't. But that's the point. Hold still for a moment. Chains, and just like goes to literally encase her in all these chains. Now she starts breaking through them, using her own power, but he says Mogo is a sentient biosphere, a planet that thinks. That's a strength and a weakness. To maintain control over such a vast body, Mogo's mind has to stay focused at all times. Do you see how difficult that is? How is your focus, Sojourner Mulane? And he says it's like a sea creature that has to keep swimming to breathe. If Mogo stops thinking, it cannot start thinking again. That's how the controller captured it. Once it was focused on the Black Star Way, it could not unfocus on the Black Star Way. A self-sustaining monomania. It's the perfect Black Star, the perfect soldier, one that cannot stop following orders. But if we disrupt that focus, we disrupt the Mogo mind itself forever. We can end it. If I broadcast the death screams of a conscious mind into yours, could you focus, Sojourner Mulane? What about 100, 1,000, 2,000? How quickly would that disrupt the thought process of a sentient being, no matter its size, no matter its scale? And he says it's a simple equation. Sacrifice 2,000 people to save the universe, and all you have to do is let it happen. And so Sojourner Mulane, when she's literally being chained down by Tomar-Re, just says, you lost me at death screams. And he says, do you think the trillions that Mogo killed didn't scream? Do you think it doesn't hurt when your planet explodes under your feet? Yes, your people are going to die to save an infinity of lives just like theirs. And she says, right, like 2,000 people that I grew up with, right? And his response, 2,000 people that you don't much like. Let's be honest about that at least. Whole interstellar civilizations are enslaved to the Black Star Way, conquered and forced into subservience, and it's all done through fear of Mogo. You can end that, and we can end that. So do you really care that a town that you hated might die so worlds can live? Or are you just mad that I didn't ask you before I made that decision? And she says, honestly, a little bit of both. And man, son, let me tell you something. This is crazy. I have never seen a Green Lantern use powers like this before, because she escapes from the chains, and she does it by making herself intangible, right? And so he says, like, how long have you been able to do this? And she's like, oh, I kept up appearances. I was sure that you would spill everything until you came back to gloat. Right? And so that's when he starts calling out Box, right? Trying to encase her. But because she's intangible, she passes through it. And she says, but how long? Turning unsolid was one of the first things that I learned. So I knew from the start that your boxes, your maze, your chains, they never meant a thing to me at all. You don't mean anything to me. She was playing possum this entire time. waiting for him to spill the beans about the totality of his plan. That's crazy. And so at that point, she just like transforms herself into this gigantic being, right? And says, I don't have to be solid. Do you really think that I have to be one size? And she says, cage. And at that point, encases him. And she says, that's the difference between us, Tomar-Re. If you know everything there is to know about your power, then you know your limits. I don't. And that's one of the dopest lines that I think I've ever heard. Because what she's effectively saying here is there is no limit to what she can do. Whether or not you would argue she's approaching godhood, I don't know. But Tomar just asks, what is this, right? And she says, your box, right? A way to block those mental blocks of yours. And I think it suits you. And so at that point, just operating as a prisoner, he just tells her, good for you, right? But just one question, Tomar of the Green Light. Does this change anything that I've said? Mogo is out there, and it's coming for you. You have a way to stop it, to prevent the deaths of billions at the cost of a couple thousand. Ethically, you don't have a choice. And she says, there's always a choice. And this is one of the coolest things. Tomar says, you say that now. What are you going to say when Mogo's powering up for the killing blow? When it's your finger on the trigger, and you have to make the choice between sacrificing 2,000 people or letting your world die. Right now, you're not in that situation, so you have the luxury of resting comfortably on your armchair and debating what you would do. But when you're in the throes of it, and it comes down to making that choice, let's see where your morality stands. And so he says, you should have let me take over, Joe, because then at least you would have somebody else to blame for the death of your townspeople. And so at that point, she just says, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and takes off. Because he asks when, right? When do you think when is, Sojourner Mulane? I told you, we're hunting Mogo. How do you begin a hunt, Joe? You go where the quarry can be found, and then you lay out some bait, something that it wants. When is when, Joe Mulane? When is right now. And that's when Mogo shows up on the scene and confronts everyone and says, Tomars, you are anomalies, abominations, marked for death on the orders of the controller of Mu. Learn his name and learn your sentence. Sin, the absence. S, the essence of each sentient being. Tro, to attain freedom. Sinestro, learn the meaning. It means no one escapes. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I told you, Absolute Green Lantern is phenomenal. It takes Al Ewing a little while to kind of get going, but when he does, this dude's off to the races. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.